About 10 years ago, I was working as a waitress at a local diner and living in a low-income apartment. The apartments were brand new and beautiful. To this day, it's still the nicest apartment inside that I've ever lived in. I lived on the 3rd floor. Outside looked nice-ish as well. The landscaping was kept up, and they had all these tall and thick, pretty flowering hedges that wrapped around the building. Due to some drug activity, though, it wasn't always the safest. It was normal to see needles, burned and bent-up spoons, condoms, and all that kind of stuff. We also lived right on a river close to a downtown area. Less than a mile away, there were some homeless shelters and a place called the Daily Bread where anyone in need could go for a meal. It wasn't unusual to see homeless people on the road outside my apartment complex or sleeping on benches by the playground. It never really bothered me much though. I usually worked mornings at my job, but every once in a while I would fill in for someone on the swing shift, which is 4 to 11 in case you didn't know. I usually kept my tips in my apron, then deposited the money on my way home. This particular Sunday, our busiest day, I had worked the morning shift and done really well, so when I heard they were short-handed for a swing shift, I volunteered to work a double. I ended up doing really well on that shift as well. I clocked out at 9:30 with about $250 in my apron. I stopped at my bank to make a deposit through the ATM and got home at around 10:15. I pulled up and saw that I had a spot fairly close to the stairwell. It was dark, but I could see there was no one else around. I parked and walked past the hedge. I turned right to go up the stairs when out of the corner of my eye, I could see a man hiding between the hedge and the building. As I looked further to the right, I could see he was smoking a cigarette, wearing jeans and a black shirt. He was also covered in paint, like he was a house painter or something. He looked like he was clearly on drugs, wide-eyed and more than a little crazed. He saw me look over at him. I felt creeped out because I'd not seen him from my car. I was wondering why he was standing out of the light and hiding behind this hedge. I started to take the stairs 2 at a time. I got to the top of the first flight of stairs when I heard someone following behind me. I looked back, and of course it was the man. We made eye contact, but he was already halfway up the stairs and running straight at me now. I was running too, and freaking out internally. Even if I did beat him up the stairs, I might need to unlock my door. My roommate and I usually kept it locked. I kept running as fast as I could. When I got to the top of the second flight, he was only 4 steps behind me. I ran even harder and debated screaming for help. I got to the top of the 3rd flight and I was still 15 feet away from my door. He was right up on me. I could hear him breathing hard. His eyes were bulging. His arms were outstretched to grab me. He was only a foot away now. My apartment was still 10 feet away. I inhaled and opened my mouth as loud as I could to scream for help when my 6'4", buff-as-fuck construction worker neighbor opened his apartment door. He just so happened to be coming out for a smoke. I let out a scream that started in horror but trailed off in relief. My neighbor saw what was happening and started running to me. The man turned right around and sprinted off. My neighbor chased him to the 2nd floor, then ran back up and yelled for his girlfriend to call the cops. At this point, I was a hyperventilating, crying and shaking puddle on the ground. My neighbor comforted me and got my best friend/roommate to come help me. I really thought that man was going to catch me and do something terrible to me. Looking back, I think it's more likely he was trying to rob me because I was still wearing my work apron and it was late. We made a police report where the cop told us that a day labor company for the homeless had a painting contract nearby that they were currently working. And the cops made it a point to start doing more drives through our complex. My roommate and I bought some mace and started calling each other to watch the other person come upstairs if it was a dark night whenever we got home. So this happened when I was 16, visiting my grandma who lived in a small town in Poland. For context, it was summer, and my family wasn't with me at the time. As you can imagine, living without my parents for a short time, especially because my grandma was very chill, was like a dream to a little kid. I could stay out late as much as I wanted to, without my parents being able to prove it. Now, at 16, you feel like you're invincible. You don't really think about how many fucked up people there are in this world. Because of this mindset, I wasn't worried about walking alone at night. The day on which this story takes place was very warm. I remember shopping and hanging out with my friends until about 8 p.m. when it started to rain. Instead of walking home quickly, I decided to visit my aunt's house and hang out with my cousin for a bit, then walk home once the rain had stopped. Well, I had lost track of time and ended up leaving her house at about 10:30 p.m. At this point, the rain had mostly stopped. This being my favorite type of weather, I declined my aunt's offer to drive me back, telling her I would get a cab instead. I'm still surprised she even believed this. Maybe she just didn't care though. I went on my way and called my grandma to tell her I'd be home in 30 minutes. I did not tell her I was walking alone. If there was one thing that scared me, it was the huge train tracks which you had to cross in order to get to my grandma's house the fastest. I decided to take the longer way around, through some sort of nature preserve. I'm not exactly sure what to call it. I enjoyed my walk through the light rain until the long metal bridge came into my view. Just at its beginning, I saw a man. It was a small, quiet town, so it wasn't uncommon for people to be out this late. I wasn't scared immediately. I could only see his back, but he looked like every other guy you'd pass by on the street. He didn't seem to have noticed me, and I didn't really care either. I got distracted by looking at the trees to my left, but when I came to the beginning of the bridge, the man was now nowhere to be seen. I suddenly stopped dead in my tracks and got an ominous feeling. This man couldn't have already been out of my view. It would have been impossible for him to move that fast. He would have had to run, and I definitely would have heard him running on this metal bridge. At the end of the bridge, there was a small path that led under it. It was hidden by thick bushes. I got even more scared by the thought that maybe the man was hiding there, waiting for me. I slowly started to walk backwards, not taking my eyes off those bushes. I hid behind a tree and decided to wait for a few minutes, just in case he really was hiding there. After about 10 minutes, my biggest fear came true. Suddenly, the man emerged from the bushes, looking in my direction. He was holding something big and shiny. I could make out in the dark that it was some sort of knife. My mind started racing with 1,000 questions. How did he see me? Why didn't I see that knife before? Where had he been hiding it? He suddenly started to run in my direction, extremely fast. He ran right past me, hiding behind my tree, and I was very relieved. When he was out of sight, I ran faster than I ever had before, not stopping to look behind me. I was frightened the entire way back, thinking he'd somehow catch up to me and do whatever sick thing he had in mind. Luckily, I arrived home safely. My grandma was waiting for me, already mad. I decided not to tell her about what happened, partially not to worry her, but also so she wouldn't tell my parents about our secret curfew. Looking back, this is one of the stupidest lies I've ever told. Because of what happened a month after this incident, 2 teenage girls about my age were stabbed dozens of times by this bridge. One body was found about 30 meters from it, and the other one was thrown into the nearby river. To this day, nobody knows who did it, but I'm pretty sure it was the same man I encountered that night. I was too scared to come out and tell anyone what had happened. I can't help but feel sometimes like those 2 girls would still be alive today if it wasn't for my stupidity. So this has been happening for about a year and a half now, and tonight something happened that finally made me and my boyfriend realize I was not just imagining things. About a year and a half ago, after living in my apartment for over 5 years, I all of a sudden started noticing that things would be out of place when I would come home from work. Things that almost seemed to be out of place on purpose to mess with my OCD. Sometimes I would notice knives that were put back into the knife block the wrong way, or little ornaments that I have around my house being turned to face the wrong direction. Sometimes my clothes were hung up in my closet the wrong way too. Little things like that, where I would feel that something was off, but there was no way to really prove it. In all honesty, it could have easily just been me being absent-minded when putting things away. After a couple of months of things randomly being out of place and always getting that creeped out feeling, things suddenly stopped going out of place. I put it to the back of my mind and stopped being so paranoid. I moved on with my life. That is, until about 2 weeks ago. For the past couple of weeks, my cat had seriously been trying to tell me something whenever I got home from work. Any of you who have a cat will know that exact meow. It's not an I'm hungry or an I'm pissed because you've been at work all day meow, but an OMG you'll never believe what happened sort of thing, if that makes sense. I didn't really think that much of it though. Cats can be jerks sometimes. I assumed he was just bored and wanting to complain. The other day when I came home from work though, I noticed a pair of balled-up socks that did not belong to me, sitting on my bedroom floor. My boyfriend came over the next night, and I told him he had left a pair of his socks there when he'd stayed over the weekend. He looked at the socks and said immediately they were not his. My heart sunk, and so did his. We both knew someone had been coming into my house again, and that I probably wasn't just imagining things the first time either. A few days later, I came home from work and found a bag from a lingerie store on top of my couch. It was empty. This bag had come from inside my house, as I had just bought a bathing suit from that store a couple of weeks prior. The receipt for that had been in the bag. At first, I thought my cat might have dragged it there, but upon inspecting the bag, there were no teeth or claw marks. My cat couldn't have opened my closet door either and gone into the paper recycling that I keep in there on the top shelf. The final and perhaps most unsettling thing happened tonight though. My boyfriend met me after work and we went out for dinner. We went back to my apartment after and I went to unlock my door. That's when I noticed it was already unlocked. Locking the door when I leave my house is the one thing I am the most OCD about. I don't just double and triple check it, I quadruple check it. It's not just a habit I have, but something that's deeply ingrained into me. Everyone who knows me knows this about me, as I even do it to their doors as well. I have to check 4 times or I get a sickening feeling. Even my boyfriend was on red alert when he noticed my door was unlocked. We entered my house, and I started checking to see if anything was out of place. He ran to the sliding glass door and tugged on it, and it opened up right away. I never left that door unlocked. In fact, he'd witnessed me locking it himself when I closed the door because it was getting too cold. He'd seen me check it 4 times like usual, and I'd not opened it since then. We're both convinced that somebody has been in my house. Whoever's been coming in must somehow have a key. The fact that they left the sliding glass door unlocked makes me think that maybe they're planning to come back with ill intention. If they already have the key, why would they need to unlock the sliding door unless they don't want to be identified by the security cameras at the front door of my building? Either way, I've already ordered a security system, but unfortunately it's not going to arrive for a few days. Any suggestions on what I can do in the meantime to keep safe? Also, what do you guys think? Am I just being paranoid or should I go with my gut on this one? Update. I changed my locks the other day and set up security cameras. So far, nothing else has happened. I haven't caught anything on the cameras other than my cat doing his thing during the day when I'm gone. My landlord got back to me about the security footage from the front door and said the only strangers she saw were buzzed into the building by residents, so no weirdos or previous tenants with keys or anything. Police are still patrolling the neighborhood quite often, which definitely makes me feel a little bit more secured. This story happened in early December of 2018. It was Christmas break, so I was back home from college and staying with my parents. I live on the second floor of my house, just above the sliding back door. It's a fairly heavy door, so anytime someone opens or closes it, I can hear it pretty well. Our house was built in 1940, so it creaks a lot and sound travels through the walls pretty easily. We live in a relatively safe part of town, too. The strangest people we've ever gotten are magazine solicitors, and even they stopped coming around a few years ago. We've never come anywhere close to a break-in. Admittedly, I'd gotten into a bad habit of smoking weed out of my bedroom window after my parents went to bed. Most nights, by midnight, I had my window open anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hours. It depended on how tired I was, how cold it was outside, etc. I would leave it open to air out the room while I watched Netflix or listened to music. I always listened to whatever I was watching through one earphone. This way, I had an open ear to hear if anyone got up or started walking in the hallway. That night, I had gone through my usual routine and was laying in bed watching YouTube when our alarm to our house went off. It was the blaring to all hell alarm, so the entire house was up and ready to go. My primary concern, which I realize is pretty ridiculous, was not that someone might be breaking into our house at this very moment. It was that my parents might smell the residual weed smell in my room. My dad poked his head through my door to make sure he knew where I was before he scoped the downstairs and turned off the alarm. When he knew I was okay, he asked me to go to his room with my mom. I don't think he noticed that my room's window was open. After he cleared the downstairs, he did a sweep of the front and backyard to make sure nobody was hiding in the shadows. He's pretty paranoid about most things, but honestly, I appreciate his thoroughness. He came back up and told us he didn't find anything, and we all went back to bed. I went back to my room and debated whether or not I should close my window. Stupidly, I decided not to. I figured that my dad had already swept the yard, so surely it was fine. Plus, my parents were awake and would probably freak out if they heard my window now sliding closed. I decided to wait a bit and let them get a little bit less conscious before making any window-related noises. About 15 minutes later, just as I was about to get up and close my window, the alarm went off again. My dad rushed downstairs to turn it off, just as I slid my window closed and pushed both locks back in place. A few minutes passed and my dad came and knocked on my door. I opened it. "Hey, I think it's just the wind. Don't worry about the alarm." It had been a pretty windy night, about 30 miles per hour or more. The door did give in a little on its locking mechanism, so we decided to write it off for the time being. The next morning, my dad decided to check the alarm system's app on his phone. To our horror, it showed the door being opened and closed 14 times before the alarm triggered the first time. Like I said, it's a heavier door. We've had windier nights and never had the alarm triggered or seen the sensor opened and closed so many times. My dad was telling our next-door neighbor about what had happened the night before, trying to figure out if it actually could have been the wind. Our neighbor told us, in fact, that he'd caught someone briefly entering his backyard on his security camera. He told us the man had probably freaked out once he saw his camera and moved on to our house instead. Just imagining whoever this was, standing at our back door right below my window, triggering the alarm, hiding somewhere, and probably watching my dad scope out the backyard. Then doing it all over again while I lay oblivious in my bed was enough for me to stop my midnight smoke sessions entirely. After this, we had a series of weird events happen at midnight. The next night, a woman rang our doorbell at the stroke of midnight and gave my dad his wallet, which he hadn't realized he'd even been missing. A few nights later, the alarm triggered at the back door again. Then on Christmas Eve, I was home alone while my family was at the midnight church service, and the alarm triggered twice back to back, in a disturbingly similar time span as the first night. This time, I didn't bother asking which door had been triggered. I didn't want to know. I took away a fairly simple life lesson. Lock your doors, lock your windows, and set your house alarm, even if you think you're perfectly safe.